and welcome to the Festival of Bharat. This is your host Divyanshi Sharda, and today, in fact, we have a very special guest joining us on our show. We have with us Shri Khalid Baig ji, and uh, this is a personality who in fact does would not be receiving or does not really require much introduction, especially the uproar that he effectuated last week, appearing on the really famous podcast with Shri Abhinav Prakash, the Urban Chatterati. So Mr. Khalid Beg is a social media influencer, a current affairs analyst, whose debut 2 weeks back on YouTube has single handedly challenged all the anti Indian narratives, as is now taking us and is now a talking point about Bharat across the globe. So, Khalid ji, namaste and welcome to our show.
Namaste. Thank you, Divyanshi, for having me.
It's a real honor to have you here with us. We're so happy to bring you
Very,
here.
very kind, very kind of you.
So, Khalid, tell me something. You, in your last appearance on YouTube, spoke about the Indian civilization, also known as the Indic civilization, a very beautiful choice of word that you personally do. And you specifically made the point that the Indic civilization is not getting its due. So, would you like to elaborate on what you exactly insinuated by this?
Sure, Divyanshi. So I want to elaborate on this point. Whatever we read about the Indian civilization usually is through the gaze of the outsider. And if I were to say it in Hindi, कि दूसरों की नजर से अपने आप को बहुत देख लिया. It's important that as a civilization, all the communities that are part of it and whose history is embedded with the fabric of this nation, we now see ourselves through our gaze as well. Sometimes you're looking at through the Western person's gaze, seeking their validation. Sometimes you're looking at through the invader's gaze, right? But never do we see it through our gaze. And the academia and the perceptions, the narratives in the civilizational battles seem to be stacked up against it. And I think that is why average citizens like us felt it's a need to tell the reality and separate it from the propaganda and separate it from the games that nation states play. So if I were to extend on that, is that usually this negative perception that is there about India, and it doesn't get its due, and as if we've never had liberal values. And so I would want to elaborate on that when the West was discovering liberal values after their dark ages, the Indian civilization had it long back. It's there in the soil of this land. And to give you an example for that, in the first century AD, just 100 years after the passing away of Holy Jesus Christ, you had the first church in India. So you can see the confluence of ideas, and you can see the tolerance 2000 years back. That church is a very well-known heritage site in India. Not only that, that's the first century. You go to the 6th century. During the lifetime of the Holy Prophet, the first mosque came up in Kerala. Right, and that again shows you the openness of a truly liberal society. Today, in the 20th century, we are talked about these enlightened values of, of accepting new ideas and not negating any idea, and seeing the pros and cons, and letting everyone have whatever way of idea of the way they want to see God. And that mosque, in fact, as I speak to you, is currently under renovation, and in a few weeks you would have the CM of Kerala, inaugurate the newly built thing, and I'm hopeful it will get its place in the national heritage, right? So you're talking about the 6th century. Also interesting, people in the history forget about Raja Dahir, who of Sindh, present day Pakistan and early the part of Indian civilization, gave refuge to the Muslims who were fleeing persecution, post the passing away of the Prophet. And that is the kind of civilization this is. And you look at the 8th to 10th century, if we were to continue the chronology, you look at the Parsi community which was fleeing. And of course today the smallest minority, the true minority of 70,000 odd, has made us so proud, and you have multi-billionaires from it, and the nation building has been so huge. But that is the refuge India has given them, and today they are inseparable, like Indian Parsi, it's just the same. Also, if you talk about Sikhism, faith which has originated in India, and the great Guru Nanak ji, being a part of this land, and the his chant of Ek Onkar, reverberating across the globe. And the fact that along with Hinduism, along with Jainism, along with Buddhism, along with Sikhism, four major world religions have originated in India. So today, when a 3,000, 4,000-year-old civilization is told that it's an intolerant society, I think it's a very big intellectual dishonesty that happens with this land. And there's another interesting thing, and I also came to know about it recently. You have these Siddhi tribes of Africa, and one knows that the kind of inhuman treatment Africans were treated to 200 to 300 years back. It's not that back in era in history, right? And the slave trade. Have you heard of a civilization that they were got as slaves here and then became rulers? And one can Google this up with the Siddhi tribes, right? So when you continue that civilization, when you continue all these major religions, the way they have flourished and the way the civilization has been accepting of it, and everyone has been allowed the different paths to God. So it's the cradle of religious civilization. It's the cradle of liberalism. And today too, you can see that across the length and breadth of India, even though the majority community, 80% is the Hindus, but followed by Muslims, just 20 crores, like 20 crores, not even the population of Bangladesh and Pakistan, in their separate perspectives. And then after that, the Christian community at 5 crores, the Sikh community at 2, 3 crores, Buddhist community, atheists, and all that. So I don't know what more liberal society can be there. The Constitution allows you freedom of religion and freedom from religion. So I think to define a world, India as a world, a universe in itself, to make blanket generalizations is not done. It's not fair. And that is the due which I was talking about, that the Indic civilization deserves. And we are the hope of the world. We have been for so many centuries. So people should know about it.
That's so beautifully put. And to come to think about it, it's such a sad turn of events that we see today, that so many members of our own community, the Indian community, refuse to actually recognize this fact. And it's so heartening when luminous intellectuals like you articulate your opinions so beautifully when it comes to the greatness that is Bharat. So, Khalid, however, do you look at these accusations that have now slowly started to emerge with respect to the claims that several intellectuals like you make, particularly with regards to the beautiful liberal culture of India? And there is a direct, very contradictory and oppositionary narratives that we see emerging from the other side, which instead of let alone recognizing the trend of tolerance or even inclusivity that Bharat has practiced since thousands of years, actually starts accusing us of majoritarianism and a kind of Hindu fascism, if we were to put it that way. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Majoritarianism in a diverse country, which is the most diverse country on the face of the planet amongst all the 200 countries, is a very relative term, and sometimes the ideological groups who are using it is a very sophisticated term of basically wanting to abuse and target a particular community, but wanting to do it in a very subtle and sly way, right? And also this majoritarianism is like I said, it's very relative. So whenever anybody uses these terms, so I would urge the youth to ask very direct questions, because first of all, it's if I were to give a metaphor, India is like an ocean with so many faiths and so many ethnicities and so many languages, food, culture, habits, and all. So somebody saying, no, this entire country is now majority, you need to ask, what region are you talking about? What is the particular issue you're talking about, right? Because obviously youngsters don't understand the larger games of it. At their age, I also was pretty emotional and impulsive, right? But here is how they can counter it. So if its majority is the insinuation towards which is the majority pan India per se, so then the point is that within this currently we have 28 states and 8 UTs. In the North, Kashmir is a Muslim majority UT, right? It has more than 95% Muslim majority. So you need to ask them, are you talking about that there is a majoritarian issue there? Again, Jammu and Kashmir, if you add both, still 62% roughly. I'm giving figures roughly, but more or less that ask them, is it that? Now, also when they talk about minority, right? See, again, it's a very relative term, like I explained in the first question, that about second largest, third largest. So everyone else will feel a minority to someone else, right? Now, even when I spoke about the Muslim community and Lakshadweep, a beautiful island of Lakshadweep, you have a 95% more than that Muslim population, right? So that is because they are a part of the Indic civilization, and that numbers can happen because there's a very liberal core value at the core of it, right? Now, even in other states, you look at Assam, you look at West Bengal, you look at Kerala, the second largest community numbers are huge. They're not some small, 0.1% like Parsis or Jains and all, 30, 35% and all. So that is not a small number. It's a significant number. Not only that, if you look at the third largest community, you have a Christian majority Nagaland, you have a Christian majority Meghalaya, you have a Christian majority Mizoram, you have a Goa, which is a pride as a tourist destination, where 1/4 population is Christian. But not only that, it doesn't stop there. You have a Buddhist majority Ladakh, right? So it is important to understand that the people who want to cause conflict, the people who you want to use a democratic setup and have a huge pan-nationalistic ecosystem, and their ideologies is beyond breaking nation states and this mirage that they're chasing. And obviously they are placed everywhere in academia, in media, in arts and all. So it is important. So you can't blame the average person because mainstream has that, and and very few people have that interest, and everyone usually is trying to get on with their life. But yeah, it's important to educate and make people understand. Also, maybe to make people who are involved in such ideology at least be conscious of what at least you are standing up for and what the other side, the nationalists, are standing for. So that is the thing with majoritarianism and minority. It's used as a weaponized tool, and once you see the top ideologues, I'm not talking about the general masses who follow the influencers. So once that kind of understanding is there, it gives a much more clear picture of what actually is happening on the ground.
Quite true. And a very interesting point you made is how the average Indian person does not actually or is not actually completely successful in recognizing how vicious and how malintended these ideologies are. So they feel that, like you said, because these ideologies are spread across everywhere, they feel that there is a sense of incentive or a moral obligation they have towards society by believing in those progressive ideals and to put themselves across as the awakened generation. So this is actually a very, very correct and a very insightful point that you made, is that the network runs very deep. And that is what we need to recognize and maybe even expose as soon as possible and as great as possible. So, Khalid, another point that comes to our mind, right, in the average, not only in the minds of the average Indian person, but also at times even members on the nationalist side, like you talked about, do get confused when they're bombarded with the jargon that the opposing faction constantly throws at them. And one of the major jargons that are thrown towards us is how there is a constant rising and progressive sense of tension between India's three largest religious communities. So, what would be your comments regarding the same?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, if you're talking about India's three largest communities, and in the last question that I explained, that how also they pan out across India, where in some they are the majority. And sorry, I forgot to also add that 6 are the majority in Punjab, so that's your fourth largest community as well.
Mhm.
So see, I give it the example. It's one of my favorite movies, Amar Akbar Anthony. It's a classic, and I give this example always that usually with the whole reform system, and the Amar has been ready as an elder brother to usher in the reforms and even question some of his most sacred truths and all. Now the point that every time only he's expected to have it, and rest the younger brothers are saying that no, whatever, because of vote bank politics, we will not abide by it. So after a point there would be a reaction, but that reaction too is not something where you should take it as if it's a complete attack on the communities. It's an attack, like, I mean, just when you were comfortable, when he was, as a metaphor, ready to say, okay, these are my issues, and you were ready to say, okay, fine, I mean, you should work on them, but it should be a two-way secular street, right? It can't be a one-way secular street. So I think that is the churn happening, which is given a twist of as if suddenly the three communities are now at absolute tensions. Not at all. In a way, it's good, like let the uh, arguments, counter arguments happen, and let those honest discussions happen, so that we don't only concentrate on the symptoms. We concentrate on the core issue and get that solved, so that the nation can go ahead. Rest, obviously, if anybody, any hardliner from all the three communities is saying that no, we'll get out after each other, I think there is enough common sense amongst each community. But it is important that the moderates start talking to each other and don't allow the extremists to call the shots.
For certain, that should be a priority. This extremist sentiment should never be pandered to, or should never be motivated, irrespective of which community it comes from. And Khalid, people can accuse you, although, of speaking from a position of privilege, right? Because I know personally and even professionally several people who might think that you are using your voice to act as a token for the nationalists or for the Hindutva majoritarians. So, what would be your response to them?
Well, I would suggest that every person who is privileged should use his privilege for the betterment of society. And privilege is not about having this virtue signaling and saying I love poverty. It is about ensuring that the poor person, or the one who is lower to you in the economic ladder, that the truths and luxuries and the conveniences that you have, and you see things on a larger scale which the civilization is giving you, you explain that to him and try to get his what you believe is like the higher ideals, try to get him to that stage. That is actually empowerment, not that using them as pawns in your political games and winning. You want to uplift the community, right? You want a constructive thing. You want to be a Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, where you are wanting them to educate themselves. You don't want them to be some person in history who's asked for destruction, picking up arms and all that. Also, Divyanshi, it's an interesting thing. Usually it's a trope used by a lot of communist ideologues that check your privilege. It's a very relative thing. For a person, again, India has its share of economic inequalities. See, it's a very simple thing, Divyanshi. If you, for a person who's in below poverty line, right, and there is a section of our country, and definitely they're coming out of it. For him, the person who is in the poverty line is privileged. For the person who is in the poverty, the lower middle class is privileged. Vice versa, for lower middle class, the middle class is privileged. For the middle class, the higher middle class. From the higher middle class, the rich, then the super rich and ultra rich. So if anybody is accusing you of that, you should not get defensive. Rather, ask him that, okay, but who gives you the right to speak on behalf of all the poor people, and what is it that you want to do for them? Right. And see, it's very important to understand behind all this these manufactured and exaggerated fights between India's various communities, the actual divide also lies between the poor and the rich. Question is that what kind of a privilege do you want to have? I've written about this once, and when riots happen, sadly, it is the rich who plans them, it is the poor who executes them, it is the middle class who cheers them, right? So what kind of a rich do you want to be? Do you want that guy and tell him, yes, go after that community? No. You have to be a moderate in all times. You have to, what is the difference ultimately in a moderate and an extremist? Moderate works for peace even during war. Extremist works for war even during peace. So yes, somebody accuses you of privilege, say yes, and I'll use this privilege for the betterment. I would want, for what I've understood my religion, right? I would want the same for my neighbor's kid, for the poor man's kid, what I want for mine. So even if God forbid he's a victim, you will not tell him entire life you're a victim, because that way you're wanting to be his owner. You want him to get out of it, right? And what you will see surprisingly is that sadly people who are victims of religious riots, right, whether on the Muslim side, whether on the Hindu side, majority of them who suffer, they actually later want to have very good lives. Right. My friend was talking to me about this Muslim victim of where he was falsely implicated in terror charges. Right. But when he came out, he's trying to educate people and trying to educate community, and he doesn't want anybody else ever to miss that fate. But you will have some person who has a pan-nationalistic ideology use his story to instigate others. Right. So yeah, question is, privilege is relative in India and everywhere, and it's important how you use that privilege.
I mean, I would term this response as a befitting reply because that is what a certain cabal often refers to the leftist tropes that are thrown at us when they consider it to be something appropriate. But this is such an apt summary of what an individual should reply with whenever they are posed with the question of speaking from a point of privilege. So, very beautifully framed, Khalid. And
Thank you.
finally, after all these wonderful thoughts you've shared with us, what exactly, according to you, are the internal and external threats India currently faces?
Right. So I would like to quote our former Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh, and this was in a press conference, I guess, in 2010 or 11. I
Mm-hmm.
might not have the exact dates, where he stated that when asked what is the biggest internal threat that India faces, and he said it is left-wing terrorism, right?
Oh, shocking.
So, and that runs that, I mean, obviously it's been curbed, and the Naxalite terrorism movement has been curbed in a lot of districts. We've lost a lot of our Jawans, sadly. But, and then he said that that is the biggest point that is detrimental to our growth. And that remains till now. And that is why it is important not to get confrontational on social media, or try avoiding it as much, because see, people don't know the layers behind the layers, the politics,
Mm-hmm.
the cultural and other things and all that. But that is the thing, and that ails India. And because see, they use these tropes of getting through, oh, there is because of poverty, somewhere it's due to human rights. But if you, what is important that you always ask that what is the larger ideology, right? For example, if someone
Mm-hmm.
asks about India, like, here's the constitution, these are the values we live by, this is the laws. So similarly, you always ask those guys, and it will not be the cadre, it will be the top ideologues. So it is
Mm-hmm.
important, and that is also important because that will always ensure you're fighting against ideas, you're not fighting against individuals, right? And that differentiation is very important, right? And also, I would like to compliment you. I mean, you write a lot of on Indic civilization. You write with a lot of grace, and there is never a generalizations towards any community, and still you put your point, and that is how I think youth of your age should, put it. So that is what ails India. Of course, relative minority anywhere will have, that's a natural human trait. But this perennial victimhood stacked
Mm-hmm.
against nation, against the majority, is as potent as the majority communalism would be, and they need to be called out. But yet, see, they are in the political stream. They are not terrorism or secessionist movement. Secessionist movements have an irony. In fact, it's not an irony; it's a strategy, like, of these ideologues who use democracy
Mm-hmm.
to subvert it, and go through all the. They are found everywhere, and it is your journey. You will have to, everybody will have to figure it out on their own, that how they view it and how they map everything, that they use these systems itself to subvert it and call other fascists, whereas their own whole thing is that balkanization of the country and
Yes.
all that. So that is number one always, right? Where you lose the very security forces was securing the idea of India, your way of life. And it is important to understand because their main tool is always to demonize any security force. And you have to understand security forces in the police, in the other areas, CRP of others and all, they are made up of Indians of every religion, every caste. So they are
Yes.
dying for you. So, and then on that also they play all that, but you have to understand, think of it in a cool manner. So that is number one always. The other things, of course, but the more moderates in every community will hold the fort. Those are more or less political heated things, right? And
Mm-hmm.
politics, obviously, one should look at all these things beyond politics and all that. It's much larger civilizational everyday life, right?
Of
So
course.
number one would be that. Number two would be the communalism in the various communities. Sometimes at par, sometimes maybe more in the majority, and that needs to be called out. But that's not an existential threat. That still can be challenged politically, and the mechanisms and society in general across the spectrum is pretty modern majority. And that credit also needs to go to the fabric, because you see with the Indian Muslims, also with the other countries, falling prey to acts of terrorism, you have by and large a community which has not been a part of it. And that is because they are part of the Indic civilization. So these are the things which I think are the internal, external. And of course, the ones who are into breaking nation states, they have external allies, because
Mm-hmm.
pan-nationalistic ultimately against nation states has that advantage. So you also have to
Quite true.
educate the youth that what are you up against. You are up against some guy in some country who has particular affiliation due to his ideology, or the other person willing inside here. So important you
Mm-hmm.
don't get defensive and you take them on that way and educate them, and but yeah, never be apologetic about loving your home, right? You would not ever want that, and these notions that, oh, borderless and all that, it doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
logical sense. You can't have an illegal tenant in your house. So ask that person, would you be okay with somebody coming in a house? He'll be the first person, no, get him out of the
Exactly.
society on. So I think that is what ails India, and those are the things which obviously successive governments, irrespective of ideologies, have tried within their ways to tackle.
Very rightly put. And so many problems that our nation faces. But I feel that with people like you in our beautiful country and with so many others who think like you, we will definitely fight this numerous issues that are plaguing our country right now together and with harmony. And
Sure,
with
we all
that,
will.
thank you so much, Khalid, for joining us today on our platform. We are very honored to have you here with us, and it was truly a pleasure interacting with you.
Thank you,
Namaste.
Divyansh. Thank you very much.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.